Hey everyone, John Bella here. Today we're going to take a look at lifecycle methods in React. In React, we have two primary types of components. There are class components and function components. Today we're going to focus on class components. Class components provide access to an underlying API known as Lifecycles. These lifecycles allow developers to hook in at various different points in the execution of a component and perform actions. So today what we're going to do is build a component that will console log different lifecycle methods during the course of its execution. But first, let's start with this app component that you see here on your screen. We have a constructor, which we'll cover in just a moment, but it sets a default state of expanded to false, then a method called toggle content, which is not a typical lifecycle method. This is a custom method that we've created that just toggles true or false on that expanded state. And then a render method with a button inside it that says toggle, and then just calls that toggle method, toggle content method. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a content component called class content. Now we'll start with the render method. The render method is the only required method in a class component. It can be entirely stateless. As long as it has a render method, it is a valid component. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put some content in here. So class name, content. I set up some default styles. We'll say hello world. Now let's give this a save and we'll see what this does. Absolutely nothing because we need to render it. So this .state.expanded. If it's true, we want to display our content. If not, we just want to display an empty div. Now let's see what happens. So we can toggle this component. But as you can see in our console, we're not logging anything. So the constructor method is called before the component mounts and before the render method. So we should say super, and we'll say console.log constructor. Now, let's see what happens here. Now we're logging the word constructor before the component comes on the screen. The next thing we want to do is component did mount. Now, component did mount is called after the component is rendered. And it's typically where you would find things like asynchronous requests, anything that requires a DOM node before initialization. So for example, you have a tooltip that you want to set a width on and a position on, but you need a component in the DOM before you can attach it to it. So component did mount is typically a place where you can assume that whatever is in your render method is always on the screen and is a good place to perform that action. So we'll say console.log component did mount. And then in render method, what we'll do is we'll just console log render. So now let's save this and watch what happens. So you can see constructor is called, then render is called, then component did mount is called. Next, we'll look at the component will unmount method. And then we'll say console log component will unmount. So component will unmount is a good place to do things like, for example, if you have something that is directly attached to the DOM, it's a good place to detach that and just allow your application to forget that it existed. So for example, if you're doing anything with scroll position or anything that is attached to a DOM node, that is a good place to detach it. So again, let's save and run through this. Now you can see constructor, render, component did mount. Now component will unmount. So the methods that we have access to in the lifecycle fall into sort of four overarching categories: mounting, updating, unmounting, and error handling. If you want to refer back to our previous video on error boundaries, you'll see the use of the component did catch lifecycle method. In the updating method, or updating category I should say, we have get derived state from props, which also happens on mount. We have should component update, which determines whether you should re-render your component. Typically React will handle that, but there are certain cases where you may not want a component to update, or a component may not update in a fashion where you would like it to. Then you have get snapshot before update, and then component did update. All of these lifecycle methods provide a very powerful API for developers to do exactly what they need with their applications. If you have any questions, feel free to drop into the comments below. If you liked this video, please hit the subscribe button